But Switzerland is still winning the race.
So despite all of this, yes. So also clearly everyone is carrying out POCs and experiments, and then the ECB has 3 experiments around this as well.
But nobody has built exactly what we have built in Switzerland.
Nobody has got It's as far as a Western developed economy, there's nowhere else in the world where you're settling securities transactions in wholesale CBDC, where in a production environment you have the central bank issuing tokenized central bank money, and the fact that they've now made that statement that they'll continue to support this and issue central bank money on chain, minimum 2 years, expand the scope, include more members. That's a huge statement.
I'm your host, Ian Simpson, and today we bring you the second installment of my conversation with David Newns, who is the head of the SIX digital exchange, SDX. In part 1, we discussed the development of SDX and its focus on digital securities and some of the under-the-hood aspects of SDX, including its distributed central securities depository and the trade-offs between precision settlement and post-trade settlement with netting, as well as the need for proper regulation and a riskless payment currency for wholesale settlement between banks. In part 2, we discussed the ongoing development of SDX and the wider topics and initiatives in Switzerland and beyond, with the involvement of SDX, the Swiss National Bank, and many other players.
Here in Switzerland, there's been a multi-year project, 5-year plus now, called Helvetia, which has been the SNB's initiative to explore this whole concept of tokenized central bank money. So issuing central bank cash on chain. And with Helvetia 1, they looked at technologically, was it feasible? And that was a BIS SDX SMB initiative. Helvetia 2 involved a swathe of market participants, large and small banks, and then that proved out that operationally and from a regulated perspective, and from the perspective of integration into core banking systems, so actually watching the flows go all the way through from tokens being issued to settlement occurring and being recorded in banks' internal systems. You could achieve that with central bank digital currency. And then Helvetia 3, which was a landmark in capital markets globally, was the first time that central bank money was ever issued on-chain in a production environment for the purposes of settling transactions. And we have now settled over 700 million francs worth of transactions on SDX in wholesale central bank digital currency, which that in of itself it puts Switzerland at the very forefront of the adoption of digital assets on a global basis. So that level of innovation is really quite staggering. And it doesn't stop there, because 2 weeks or so ago, the central bank announced that they were going to prolong the support of the CBDC on SDX for a minimum of 2 years, with a mechanism for rolling that on forwards, and that they will expand the participants to anybody who is eligible for an interbank clearing account at the SNB and is a member of SDX. And in addition, over time, increase the scope of functionality, so we can address all the other pieces, because what we have now is rather limited in scope in terms of what we can do with the CBDC, to all the other kinds of operations that get conducted in CBDC and capital markets on FMI. So that actually kind of catapults Switzerland not just to sort of stay at the forefront, but it's a huge leap forwards. And there really is no other developed Western economy that stands at that point in the adoption of digital assets. And if I go back to that structure that we're putting together, where we have the right regulation, a regulated blockchain, we have interoperability with the traditional infrastructure, we have a network of member banks on that platform who are carrying out activities. there's sort of the third leg to a stool was going to be the riskless settlement asset being available on chain, so that you now built up this infrastructure, this architecture, which is going to be strong and stable enough to be able to then facilitate the use cases that we are all excited about. So we've now achieved equivalence, hooray! Right. So with all those pieces in place, you absolutely can do everything that you can do on traditional infrastructure, but now using blockchain and tokenized instruments. Again, nowhere else in the world has this been achieved except for here in Switzerland. And I think that the Swiss Financial Centre should be appropriately sort of proud and also excited about this opportunity that it's availed itself of, and it really will, I think, ultimately be a massive differentiation for the Swiss Financial Centre when it comes to its place in the world.
Going back to a topic that I wanted to come to earlier, with the members on SDX and working with this infrastructure, obviously they've given lots of input in how it's built, but then they themselves have also needed to build up their capabilities to interact with this, to be able to read this decentralized CSD, and then also to work with custody, right? How has that process gone, and where are members and maybe banks more generally in adapting and getting ready for this next digitalization wave?
So it's a very interesting question, because it also has within it an observation that this is, or an implication that this actually is a heavy lift, and I would say that it is a heavy lift. We're talking about a whole set of new technologies that a bank is not familiar with. Now, if I look at the first members we had of SDX, so our pioneers, UBS, ZKB, and Credit Suisse, who came on board back in 2021. Obviously, at that point, but we're both learning, and typically, this was their first experience of any interaction around with blockchain technologies being used in this particular way, because we were kind of unique in the world, and still to a great extent are. So that hasn't changed a vast amount. What you need to do as a member when it comes to accommodating this technology is ensure that all of your business support functions get comfortable with it, and that is quite a significant lift. So from a risk and legal and compliance and technology perspective, you need to have these guys get comfortable, adjust or accommodate digital assets, tokenization, blockchain technology, cryptographically secured assets, management of private keys. All of that needs to be, and then integration into the core banking system. These are all massive lifts, but either in terms of people or technology, they all need to work to accommodate this technology into their control environment and technology environment and so on. So one of the reasons why it takes us quite a long time to onboard a member is because the workshops we need to carry out with representatives from these firms are pretty extensive and very involved, because this is the first time that they've encountered this very often that's the first time they've encountered this sort of thing. What you end up afterwards, though, is now you have enabled a capacity within that member, within that bank, for them to take that learning and that understanding and that technology and apply it to other contexts outside of SDX and SIX. So I think that it's an incredibly beneficial exercise. And for us, on the one hand, we were very concerned that clearly this is a big lift for a bank to go to start talking, to actually get their hands around this. What we didn't understand, and the feedback we got from the banks, was what a valuable lesson that actually is for them, because it gives them this massive expansion of capability and understanding and capacities within their organization that they can apply to other contexts. So it's another way that we see that SDX and SIX Group has played a role within the Swiss Financial Centre, is issuing digital bonds And I don't really think that we'll stop marketing the fact that we have issuances of digital bonds when they happen anymore, because it's becoming part of the course. So regular. So when you stop talking about it is a massive day, I think, because it's become commonplace, and that's really because the members, the community here has reached a degree of sophistication and understanding that this has become something which is every day for them. That is not the case in other jurisdictions, and I think that capability can be, as I said, it can be transferred to other contexts, and it's a capacity that is going to benefit the entire Swiss financial centre, because now we've moved to, that was 3 banks back then. We more than tripled our membership last year, so we ended last year with 13 members. We shall at least double it again this year, and that will also include bringing on our first US banks, more international members. I mean, Commerzbank was the first international member that we onboarded at the end of last year. They were also the issuer agent for the World Bank bond. So we've really kind of crossed I think a chasm in terms of the number of and the kind of members that we're now onboarding to the platform. But if you look down the list of banks in Switzerland, all the top banks have now onboarded onto SDX, and then the next tier, and probably the next tier as well. That again represents a capability in the regulated capital market space in Switzerland that hitherto was only within the non-regulated sort of crypto valley context. That's where that understanding now that understanding has spread to the regulated sector as well, which I think is a huge benefit for Switzerland.
When we talk just about custody, that was one question that came up in my mind. So banks always face that build or buy kind of conundrum, right? And it takes a long time to build up the internal processes and understanding of things. And then when it comes to custody and handling, there's many companies working in the cryptocurrency custody space, some also working in the tokenized securities space, and in some cases those capabilities cross over. Do you think banks will outsource some of that capability to other companies? Will some of those banks turn their capabilities into a service for other banks? How do you think?
I think all of the above, yeah. I think it depends on the organisation and its appetite for providing different kinds of service and its history. I mean, it could well be that it becomes it builds up a competence and gets excited about actually pursuing commercial activities that are represented by digital asset custody. In the context of SDX, the wallet infrastructure is integrated into the nodes that they run, so that they simultaneously they host the nodes, or they run the nodes. They also manage the wallets. They manage the private keys in the wallets. That's actually a requirement of our members. So they do not sort of outsource that back to us, for instance, because legally they have to manage their own private keys. So far as I'm aware, none of them have outsourced that service to that requirement to a third party. Now, in the future, when we're talking about digital assets more broadly, and including custodying of security tokens, of governance tokens, of cryptocurrencies, in that context, where these tokens are they represent holdings on public chains, and there are now third-party custody platforms that you could potentially leverage that, or third-party custodians that you could use, you could sub-custody and so on. I think that, yes, it'll be, a variety of different approaches will be taken by banks as to whether they choose to outsource or insource that activity.
So some people have said, and you talked about it a little bit earlier, there's a lot of innovation happening in the crypto space, and then you learn from that and apply the lessons. Some people have said, well, those who maybe offer cryptocurrencies and trade cryptocurrencies today will be some of the first that move into tokenized securities in a more regulated capital markets standpoint. Do you think that's fair to say, or is it not necessarily the case, or is there going to be learnings that some banks take from here and apply here, or not necessarily?
I think that it's certainly very helpful to have the experience I mentioned before of what it means to to leverage this technology in the context of SDX and digital securities. That will certainly, I think, put you into a more comfortable position because you have expertise in-house about that. To your point about custody as well in this context, I can see that in the short term, certainly the demand for using third-party custodians is going to be extremely high because even though we need you to do custody of your private keys and so on for digital securities, the complexity of running custody for a multiplicity of coins that gets really significant really quickly because they're all a bit different and they all have different requirements, especially when it comes to coins that have governance processes built into them where you expect to vote on certain matters associated with the chain and how you need to do that via the custody platform. There's a lot of changes that need to be accommodated to actually facilitate that. If your customers are asking for new coins, then the processes that you need to go through can be very heavy in terms of determining whether you should include that, which is one of the reasons why. So we do provide crypto custody as a service to our members as well, outside of the traditional, outside of our FMI structure. So if I move and look at our cryptocurrency offering specifically, that is very much orientated around a custody offering. And there's two areas that I think are really interesting. One is this. Getting your hands around crypto custody is a challenge for an organization. So here is an institutional grade custody solution built on top of Fireblocks. It's a hybrid solution in that we manage the operations related to the private keys on that platform, which sets it apart from other providers of custody where those private key operations are still managed on cloud very frequently rather than on-prem on technology that we actually own and operate ourselves as Sixth Group, which is much more akin in many ways to us managing the enormous vault that we keep real gold in, right? So we're good at looking after things that are incredibly valuable, where processes and controls are absolutely critical. So we have that as a service, but also historically, since the CSD is essentially a custody platform, the need that we see based upon how we see the CSD being used for, as we mentioned before about collateral mobility. So the CSD on the traditional infrastructure has innumerable sets of different kinds of services, but one of them is the tri-party repo service, where you as a customer manage the collateral that frequently that you have under custody at 6SIS to manage credit lines with other platforms. Now, with platforms that you then trade on. Now, in the context of some of our customers, the collateral that is being deposited is collateral from their customers. They want to be able to keep an eye on the collateral that their customers are depositing with them, so they can then extend credit lines to those customers, enable them to trade on third-party platforms. Now, in the context of crypto, those third-party platforms are typically crypto exchanges, and in the context of crypto, the customers of the consumer of that service, the collateral management service, those customers are frequently crypto natives, and oddly enough, a lot of their collateral is digital, not securities. So you have the situation where this is a facility which traditionally we've been doing this for years in the traditional world of helping customers manage collateral to extend credit lines. But in this context of crypto, where credit lines are everything when it comes to transacting on platforms, if that collateral is digital, then you might have a challenge. But because SDX has a crypto custody platform, we can take in that crypto custody and immobilize it on our custody platform, represent that collateral inside 6SIS's existing collateral cockpit, so that within one view, a customer, so market participant, can see collateral, whether it is traditional securities or crypto, and manage that effectively to ensure that they are completely comfortable and are managing credit lines in the most effective way possible in that tri-party repo context to enable the maximum credit lines to be enabled between their customer and that trading platform. So that another example of interoperability, and I think something that is kind of rather unique in this space, and something where an FMI can play a really interesting role because it's extending its traditional role again into this new into new markets, in this case into crypto, because of its ability to provide regulated, trusted infrastructure from a party which traditionally has done this as their bread and butter.
Interesting. Yeah, I could see that being a very interesting development in the space. Again, something not so, shall we say, sexy or out in the open as far as innovation, but something in capital markets that is very, very...
In capital markets, this facility drives capital markets.
Yeah.
I mean, your ability to manage credit lines so that you can actually trade in the first place is absolutely critical. You do that by posting collateral. If you can only post a subset of the collateral that you have available to you, because half of it is or more of it is crypto, then that's inefficient. Whereas if you can also include crypto in that, then we extend the ability to provide that, to extend that credit line. More trading can occur in that context of regulation, of safety, specifically everything that the institutional world requires to conduct these activities.
So then we could imagine even more crypto foundations, people with these kinds of assets, high net worth individuals and so on, flock into Switzerland and taking advantage of this.
Exactly, because we know that, again, some of those foundations now manage, they hold both crypto and traditional securities in their portfolios, so they can, again, leverage that entire set of instruments for the purposes of actively trading.
Let's go back to the topic of regulation, not to go too deep and heavy into it. MiCA just came online, so to say, in the last week or so. But before we get there, there's also been some advancements in Swiss DLT law in the last few years. What do you think about that, and how would that apply or not apply to what SDX is doing or wants to do in the future? Yes,
so those two bits of regulation are really are interesting. I think MiCA going live very recently in terms of coming into law. That, I think, is of enormous significance. The fact that you now have the world's second largest economy with effective, sensible, for the most part, regulation around crypto assets. And again, it's crypto. It isn't digital securities. There's still a little bit of a hole in terms of cross-jurisdictional regulation, or basically there isn't any cross-jurisdictional regulation in the EU that covers digital securities, which is an interesting fact in and of itself. What we're going to see is, again, that's a catalyst to adoption and to by the institutional space when it comes to participating in the crypto universe, as it were, where with that as an asset class. So it's, again, different to leveraging blockchain to add efficiencies and open new capabilities within the existing capital markets. It's a new economy, as it were. It's like encountering a new country, and then being able to actually invest in that country's economy. And the things that I find exciting this year have been MiCA, and a good example of something that's already happened, which is, I think, again, a sort of a milestone, is the fact that Circle for USDC and EURC was granted a license, an e-money operator license, earlier this week. So congratulations to Jeremy, Dante, and team for achieving that world first. I think that's really significant. I think as significant as Switzerland actually extending its CBDC, essentially on a path to full production. And that will act as a catalyst, I think, for broader adoption, because once you have that sort of regulatory certainty, then you can build on that.
And regarding the Swiss regulation,
so DLT securities. So I think really innovative. The challenge that we have with DLT securities, and I think that's one of the reasons why the market isn't sort of swinging over to DLT securities like with any pace, is that it doesn't really address the sort of the UX issues, as people refer to them. So one of the benefits, and I'm going to go back to this notion of interoperability. So if as an investor, to hold a kind of an instrument requires that you accommodate, embrace, implement an entirely new kind of infrastructure. Mm-hmm. And here we're talking about wallets and connecting those wallets to public chains, mm-hmm. And managing your private keys in those wallets. As an institutional investor, that is a enormous lift and something that at the moment is not easily facilitated by your custodians, except for in a small number of cases. So I think in the future that will change as custody platforms either get provided by third parties such as ourselves to banks, or the banks themselves ultimately roll out their own custody platforms to make that process of holding those securities more seamless to the underlying investor, because what you don't want to do is just make it more difficult and add mm-hmm. risk to that underlying investor's world. I mean, mm-hmm. they want to focus on what they're good at, which is determining what assets they want to hold in their portfolios and managing those assets as effectively as possible. Mm-hmm. They don't want to be worrying about implementing and managing wallets and keys. Mm-hmm. So digital securities, being natively digital on public chain, are a bit challenging to consume at this point in time. Mm-hmm. So that's the intermediated securities that are more traditional, the way that right now the majority of value that's represented in terms of digital securities is being held, or has been issued and being held in Switzerland. But I do think it's a really interesting step forwards. There is some questions around how, as an institutional client, you might hold that. I see that being a bit problematic in terms of the DLT security is considered a security under the law, but it's a bit in contradiction to the BIS's treatment of crypto assets, which says that permissionless tokens are crypto assets and should be treated essentially the same as a cryptocurrency like mm-hmm. Bitcoin. Mm-hmm. So as a bank, holding that asset on your balance sheet will incur a 1,250% capital charge, which mm-hmm. makes it very uninteresting mm-hmm. As an instrument to hold on your balance sheet.
Mm-hmm. That's a topic we've covered with a couple of guests already, the capital requirements. I think it's not going to go away and hasn't quite gotten cleared up or solved in that sense. Let's as we move towards the end of the session, just talk about, in the general context, and you talked about it before, Switzerland being very much at the forefront, and everything that you've built at SDX really set in the standard very high for the rest of the world. I had a conversation briefly with Thomas Moser from the SNB just about how other central banks look to the SNB to be involved in these bigger, broader global projects, which I think he and they are quite proud of. Is there really mobilization based on what you've done at SDX to replicate this and build interoperability across jurisdictions and other places, and how is Switzerland positioned in that?
98% of central banks around the world, according to that WEF study,
mm-hmm.
the report that came out in April, which I thought was really good, by the way, mm-hmm. And not just because we were heavily involved in being asked lots of questions about that on a wholesale CBDCs. So 98% of the world, central banks are conducting experiments in central bank digital currencies, mm-hmm. And for all the reasons I mentioned earlier. I mean, it's that whole, if the world goes tokenized, they need to have something that is tokenized central bank money for all these reasons. And there are other use cases, but essentially what we're seeing as well is that wholesale CBDC is really being focused on. I think more and more this year it feels that the whole retail CBDC thing is kind of dying away a bit, especially for developed Western economies. The Eurozone is a bit different. They're still pursuing digital euro with some degree of tenacity. But with this, if you look at the plethora of CBDC projects that exist around the world today. It's really, really remarkable. So we have not only, again, that almost every central bank in the world is doing some sort of experimentation or pilot or POC in CBDC, but you have these supranational initiatives that have either ones that have been going on for quite some time, or that have been recently announced. So here in Switzerland, we did some pretty substantial supranational activities already. So we did Project EURA, which was between the Swiss National Bank and the Banque de France, conducting wholesale cross-border payments in CBDC, again leveraging the SDX platform to facilitate that. There's been Project Enbridge, which is another BIS initiative, which is CBDC cross-border between the UAE and HKMA and China. Recently, Saudi Arabia joined that initiative. There's some enormous number of observers as well to that. I think Bank of Thailand is involved as well. Then more recently, Project Agora, which is the BIS's most recent initiative on this space, which is the 7 central banks that represent the largest currencies by trading volume in the world. They have all signed up to this initiative to do cross-border payments, leveraging pursuing this concept of the unified ledger that the BIS has previously talked about. In Singapore, with the MAS announced in November of last year at the Singapore FinTech Festival, the Global Layer 1 initiative, which is also really interesting. I think the G3 are involved in that. JP Morgan is involved. And then there are private initiatives like Partior, which is a cross-border platform that, again, JP, Temasek-backed initiative out of Singapore. Then there's I have 2 more. the Regulated Liability Network, which is Citibank's initiative, Tony McLaughlin sort of being the godfather of that over in their sort of digital asset department. And the US equivalent, again, backed by Citibank, but with a host of other banks involved, called the Regulated Settlement Network. Same thing, different name. Then Canton, this recently announced Layer 1, which is public permission and public but permissioned blockchain, has many of the features that look like it can also facilitate exactly the same use cases, but coming entirely from the private sector, but with this notion of a governance structure that makes sense in this particular context.
But Switzerland is still winning the race.
So despite all of this, yes. So also clearly everyone is carrying out POCs and experiments, and then the ECB has 3 experiments around this as well.
But nobody has built exactly what we have built in Switzerland.
Nobody has got as far as a Western developed economy, there's nowhere else in the world where you're settling securities transactions in wholesale CBDC, where in a production environment you have the central bank issuing tokenized central bank money, and the fact that they've now made that statement that they'll continue to support this and issue central bank money on chain, minimum 2 years, expand the scope, include more members. That's a huge statement, and actually not just means that Switzerland sort of stands at the front, but I believe that really pushes us ahead, and it's something which is hard to replicate. Not just because we've achieved so much and we built so much already, but the structure in Switzerland between the Swiss National Bank that was mentioned earlier, this mutualized infrastructure which is member-owned, the relationship between SIX and the SNB, that's a private-public partnership which is already entails our support for the RTGS platform that the SNB operates, the repo platform the SNB operates, and also having a regulator such as FINMA and having informed individuals over there. I think we have regular constructive dialogues with the likes of Matthias Oprecht on the fintech desk there, really, really informed individuals who are themselves, I think, pioneers in this field. The individuals and as well as the organizations that they work for, that capacity, that capability, and that pioneering perspective, and that awareness that to maintain our edge as a center of financial services that provide the most innovative but also the most safe and secure and trusted services in the world, as Switzerland, that does require that we are pioneers in this new space, and we are pushing forwards to these new horizons. And it's very, very satisfying to see that demonstrably that is the case.
Definitely so, definitely. We have one question left. We ask every guest that comes on the podcast, is there something both at SDX or more broadly in the market that is happening that people aren't talking about that you can think of, maybe give us a hint to watch out for in the next 6, 9, 12 months, something that will be very interesting to see develop?
Well, I talked about how it feels like there's been this sea change, and the visible manifestations of that, I think, are Circle being granted an e-money license in Europe, largest economy in the world, largest market in the world, now regulated through MiCA. The CBDC initiatives here in Switzerland, these are visible sort of indicators of something that's happening. What we're feeling at SDX as a result of the momentum that we've seen following the announcements and the background, sort of the tailwinds from the adoption of digital assets more broadly, but also the support of our stakeholders such as the SMB and our members. The flurry of new onboardings we're having at the moment, what we're seeing different about the conversations we're having now is that our members are bringing us use cases that they want to actually leverage our blockchain to deploy, to actually further their own digital ambitions. So it's no longer the case that we are trying to persuade people that there's something special about blockchain and that why is a digital bond better than a traditional bond, and why that conversation has changed to, I see that you have digital bonds available on-chain, you have a central bank digital currency available on-chain. Within the context of what you can provide to the market, I want to be able to facilitate these use cases. I have this requirement for you guys to actually do, to actually enable me to take advantage of. And they are around collateral mobility and fractionalization. So being able to hold fractions of assets in customer accounts, which we can do. So our CSD has unlimited capacity for sub-accounts, numbers of sub-accounts on the ledger. So instruments which previously have been too lumpy, so the minimum size to hold has been too large, those can be fractionalized on our blockchain on a piece of mutualized infrastructure, and then provided into and then held at the sub-account level, so that you can actually enable new instruments to be held by customers as an asset manager that previously you couldn't do. So again, and then following on from that, there's a whole bunch of other use cases that come out of that as well around programmability. So you can then manage the distribution of assets held in a portfolio based upon a number of parameters which you can program onto the blockchain, which will then automatically manage the holdings. So these fractions and then the programmability, they begin to see how the natively inherent functions of the blockchain are being exploited by our new members who are coming on board. And I believe in the next 6 to 12 months, we'll begin to see production implementations and examples of totally new innovative solutions being provided to ultimately the underlying investor. And what that also means, and that also comes with in a cost-effective fashion. So we believe that is where you really begin to see the benefits of all this building work that's been done. So you'll begin to see that superstructure of the skyscraper in all its gleaming glory begin to sort of appear, having done all this hard work of building the foundations that's been carried out over the last 5-6 years here in Switzerland.
Super. Very, very interesting. We'll be looking for that. David Newns, thank you very much.